become less capable of feeding itself. Clearly, something is wrong. One problem is now evident: cattle. These domesticated animals are man's traditional method of food production. Both Africans and Europeans alike believe that if reared in sufficient numbers, cattle can become the answer to our protein needs. Cattle are totally unsuited to this type of arid, low rainfall region. They evolved in Europe and Asia in areas of high rainfall where grass and water are plentiful. These animals live off a single food source: grass. In Africa's low rainfall regions, where soil is poor and the climate has long dry spells and regular droughts, they easily devastate the rangeland as they struggle to survive. In the dry season, the herds cluster near drinking pools, overgrazing the surrounding areas. These pathetically ill-equipped creatures are left to starve in a wasteland created by their own appetites. In these areas, high numbers of domestic animals are the primary cause of a deadly phenomenon: desertification. Desertification has become an environmental disease, now spreading like a malignant cancer across Africa's low rainfall regions. This is where the low rainfall regions occur. They stretch in an immense and almost continuous arc from the Sahara in the north to East Africa, and then on to the Great Plains of southern Africa and the Cape. The countries worst affected by famine are all located in the low rainfall regions. The red shows where desertification has taken hold and is spreading. Satellite pictures indicate that desertification now expands at a rate of 35,000 square miles a year. What you see was once productive grassland. In recent years, foreign aid programs financed new wells in the area. They also established veterinary facilities, so the cattle herds grew. And they did so at the cost of the one resource man can never replace: productive land. This is how it was. This is what man has made of it. Currently, 100 square miles of productive land is being invaded by desertification every day. The mechanism of desertification is simple. Once an area has been overgrazed, the sun's energy is reflected off the barren earth. Then the ground heats up the surrounding air. As it does, it dries out the moisture. Rain is dependent on moisture-laden air. As there is less moisture in the air, rainfall decreases. Desertification becomes a self-perpetuating cycle, continually growing and affecting new areas. The desert spreads, downgrading all vulnerable ecosystems. To these nomads, the accumulation of cattle is traditionally considered a measure of wealth. Cattle are rarely sold or consumed. They simply represent the financial state of a community. Domestic animals are a kind of tribal bank. The size of a herd reflects the affluence of the community. They lavish attention on their prized possessions and believe that large herds are a protection against drought, and that the bigger the herd, the more animals will survive a bad year. It is estimated that at the current rate of destruction, more than 80% of Africa's rangelands now used for domestic stock will eventually become desert. Every year, goats become more common throughout Africa. The reason is simple. They, unlike cattle, feed off a wide variety of plants. They survive easily in these downgraded ecosystems. For nomads, goats are the last buffer between a traditional way of life and abject poverty. The old African belief that surplus domestic animals represent security is now assisted by veterinary technology. The result, an increase in animals competing for food in steadily downgraded and abused environments. The inevitable outcome, destitution. All over Africa, people like these now suffer the same fate, a plight caused by an inability to recognize the environment as a perishable and finite resource, easily destroyed and impossible to replace. This generation has now little to look forward to. Their environment is collapsing, taking with it their traditional way of life. The next generation will eventually be forced to leave this ravaged land and seek refuge in the cities, condemned to a life of urban squalor. Goats are remarkably resilient creatures, but even for them, there is a time when nothing is left. Once all the available vegetation within reach is destroyed, the nomads are forced to cut down the remaining trees in an attempt to keep their precious animals alive. This community is about to become the victim of desertification. For many others, help comes in cans, but food aid can only help them to survive here for a little longer. The environment is shattered. Their fate is sealed. Africa's growing demand for food aid is directly related to the abuse of ecosystems. For millions of people, productive land is an essential commodity, and they totally depend on it. By destroying their environment, they court disaster. This community will soon be forced to flee from here or be swallowed up by the desert. Not all of Africa's low rainfall areas are open savanna. Much of the land is mountainous and wooded. These are the watersheds or catchment areas, birthplace of rivers. The vegetation on these slopes is essential to the stability of soil and the health of river systems. Once only a few families of subsistence farmers lived here. Now, as human numbers grow, more people settle in these catchments. Trees are cut down and crops planted. Nature's balance is upset. As more people abandon their traditional subsistence lifestyle and become part of a cash-oriented economy, more land is needed to produce more. As human numbers grow, they show no concern for these delicate watershed ecosystems.